Hello and welcome to the Bestseller Experiment, where we explore the inner game of writing and inspire you to start, finish, and publish your book. I'm Mark DeVoe, and this week I'm treating you to the best of the Bestseller Experiment. I've delved through and handpicked my favourite shows of the 500 plus that we've done of best-selling authors who have collectively sold over 1 billion books. Who's it going to be this week? Here's a teaser. In this episode...
So I sort of had my own bestseller experiment. You know, this is not like top secret news or anything. My dad's the novelist Stephen King. And I always wanted to be a writer.
Never heard of him.
Yeah, Stephen who?
He's a guy who shows tremendous promise. I'm also terrifically interested in what you're doing. Is it possible to consciously set out to write a bestseller? I mean, of course, the answer is no. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't try.
So it's been great having you, Joe. I was wondering if you were looking forward to this podcast so much, because we've had to do what we call a threesome online, which I've never done before, Joe.
Yeah, actually, I do a lot of internet threesomes. Usually I'm not fully dressed. I've been reading a book called The Power of Two by a guy named Josh Schenck, and he's examined great creative couples like Lennon-McCartney, the Coen brothers, Watson and Crick.
Well, we're not Lennon and McCartney, I can tell you that right now. We're more like steptoe and son. The original Coca-Cola recipe had a solution of cocaine in it.
I agree, if your book includes a package of cocaine for each buyer, it will sell. So do you want to hear my new one weird amazing trick? Doesn't it sound like one of these things you click on the internet that you shouldn't click on? It's never fails. Tremendously successful. Just, I sit down, boom, words start to flow. Someone said, I can fix a crappy page. I can't fix a blank page. I called my wife and I said, oh my God, I think the Atlantic Monthly published me. I'm holding an envelope. And she said, oh my God, that's the best. You've got to tear it open and read it to me. And I said, oh, this is the best. This is the best. And she said, I'm so proud. I said, I just don't believe it. And I tore it open and it was...
Hello and welcome to the Bestseller Experiment, where we discover what makes a best-selling novel while trying to write, publish and market one in just a year. I'm Mark Stay.
And I'm Mark DeVoe, and welcome to this episode. So, Mr. Stay, what an exciting week we have this week.
Oh, yeah. We've got a fantastic guest for everyone this week. Someone who it's been my pleasure to sell his books for quite some time now. One of the giants of modern fiction and horror. It is none other than Mr. Joe Hill. Welcome to the show, Joe.
Hi, guys. Thanks for having me on.
Hi, Joe.
Our absolute pleasure.
I've been looking forward to talking to you guys. I've actually been thinking about this for a couple weeks now. In part because I'm interested in how collaborations work out. I've been reading a book called The Power of Two by a guy named Josh Schenck, a psychologist. And he's examined great couples, great creative couples like Lennon-McCartney, the Coen brothers, Watson and Crick, and the way they form their own language and start to finish each other's sentences. And, and if you guys do succeed in publishing a bestseller, I think it will be because you managed to get your partnership to that point where there's that sort of, the two of you make more than the sum of the two parts.
Well, we're not Lennon and McCartney, I can tell you that right now. We're more like steptoe and son at the moment.
Really, yeah, absolutely. That's really interesting. I was wondering if you were looking forward to this podcast so much, because we've had to do what we call a threesome online, which I've never done before, Joe.
Yeah, actually... I do a lot of internet threesomes. Usually I'm not fully dressed. I mean, this is the first time I've ever had my clothes on for one.
Which we appreciate very much.
Set the tone nice and early. Thank you, Joe.
Yeah, absolutely. That was probably my fault, actually. But
I'm also terrifically interested in what you're doing because there isn't really a literary science, but no. It is kind of interesting, the idea of, is it possible to consciously set out to write a bestseller? I mean, of course, the answer is no, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't try.
So it's been great having you, Joe.
Now, Joe, I was talking to you just before Christmas, and you were telling me something about you were going to try and read every one of the New York Times bestsellers or some crazy scheme like that. Is that still happening? Is that something you're still on?
So I have this thing that I'm doing where any book that makes more than 50 weeks on the New York Times bestseller list, I read it. Because I'm curious to see what did everyone get excited for? What were they responding to? My plan was to start at the beginning of this century. So if it was a huge bestseller in 1987, that's different. What I'm interested in, what recent bestsellers, and not just any bestsellers, but the kind of phenomenon books, like The Gone Girls, The Girl on a Train, The 50 Shades of Grey, All the Light We Cannot See. I just want to know what people are responding to.
How many do you have to get through a year? How many hit that 50 kind of magic 50 mark?
Not too many. It's usually about one a year.
Wow.
I have to admit, I haven't read 50 Shades of Grey yet. I haven't read The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo. I live in the same small town in New Hampshire that Dan Brown calls home. I have not read Dan Brown's books yet. I feel terrible because he's a wonderful guy. I've met him a few times, but I'm still yet to read any of those novels. But I have read in the last 6 months, I think, since I started talking to Mark about this, I've read, All the Light We Cannot See, and I'm reading The Girl on a Train now, and I did read Gone Girl, and it's interesting.
Excellent. So, Mark,
are you seeing any commonalities there, Joe? Are you seeing anything that's jumping out at you that helps these books stick around for so long?
Between Girl on a Train, Gone Girl, All the Light We Cannot See, no, not really. Not really.
What we're trying to do, Joe, is we're trying to distill. How Coca-Cola has the 7 secret ingredients. We're trying to distill across all of these incredible.
Isn't that KFC? Kentucky Fried Chicken has 11 secret herbs and spices.
Yeah. And one of them has to be some kind of drug, I think, because, it keeps people coming back. It's a bit like, Mark might not know this, but I live out in Canada and we have this thing out here. You'll know this, Joe, craft dinner, right? Yeah. Craft dinner, Mark, just so you know, and for everyone else in the UK and Europe, craft dinner is like it's the student kind of meal of choice. And it comes with this, it's macaroni and cheese, but the cheese packet.
Kraft macaroni and cheese.
It's like, it's got like this kind of orange powder and it looks like radiation. And, I'm absolutely convinced it's got something in it which keeps you coming back for more. So,
Coca-Cola, the original
writer fuel. You are living the life of the aspiring writer there. If you're eating Kraft macaroni and cheese out of the box,
and then
just add the hot water.
Exactly, and then you start to just get a bit, excited and add a bit of ketchup in, mix it up a bit. It's nasty.
The original Coca-Cola recipe had a solution of cocaine in it.
Really?
Yeah, which they later removed. Because Coca-Cola was first sold as a medicinal kind of tonic. And it was only later that it became a kind of sugar water drink.
I agree if your book includes a package of cocaine for each buyer. It will sell.
Yeah.
It will sell.
For the few people left in the world that haven't heard about Joe, Mark, give us a kind of a bit of an overview just to get everyone up to speed.
Well, Joe, he's written 4 novels now. We've got Heart-Shaped Box, we've got Horns, Nosferatu, and The Fireman is the most recent one, which is coming out in paperback soon. He's written many, many short stories, which have been collected in, there's 20th Century Ghosts. And, of course, there's the comic book series Locke Key, which is absolutely amazing. And you've got a new collection of novellas coming later this year called Strange Weather.
Yeah.
And, is it too broad to call them horror, Joe? There's horror elements to them. To each of them. I mean, The Fireman is kind of a big, epic, post-apocalyptic novel as well, which,
Heart-Shaped Box is a horror novel. When I was a kid, I used to read Fangoria magazine, which is like this magazine dedicated to the, the art of the gross out special effects. Every issue always came with a centerfold. And instead of like a centerfold of, some pretty girl in her underwear, it was always some guy with an axe in his head and an eyeball popping out. And it used to make me crazy. I'd read it cover to cover. I was completely addicted. And I would, it used to make me crazy. You'd have some guy who would, who was in an interview who was saying, I don't really think of myself as a horror director. And he just directed Slumber Party Massacre 7. And I'm like, well, dude, you're not fucking Fellini either. I hate to break it to you, but so, I hate when someone dodges, I'm not really a horror writer. Heart-Shaped Box is a horror novel. My third novel, NOS4A2, Nosferatu, is a horror novel. That's a book about a guy who has a car that runs on human souls instead of gasoline. So those are both pretty scary books. Horns is my second book, is not really a horror novel. It's kind of more of a tragic satire, although it does have elements of the supernatural in it. It was actually made into a film starring Daniel Radcliffe, so that it has sort of a cult status among my books. And then the more recent novel, The Fireman, is kind of a big action-filled sci-fi movie that happens to be on paper.
That's quite an incredible range. I mean, if somebody was looking to get into Joe Hill, what would be the very first book you'd recommend them starting with, Joe?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know, because it really depends on what people like. It depends on the person. If someone wants a really, pedal to the floor, roller coaster type experience, they'd probably want either my first or my third, because those are the two sort of most straight ahead. Here's a thriller. A lot of people have really enjoyed the comic book. I've had, I think that the readership of my novels grew substantially after I started writing my comic book, Locke Key. So, yeah, I mean, it really depends on the reader.
I think the short stories are a great place to dip in as well, because they're very varied, aren't they? Again, as you just said, some are horror, some are kind of science fiction. There's it's like a great. Did you start out in short stories, Joe? Is that where you started?
So I sort of had my own bestseller experiment that I started in about, I want to say, 1994. So, this is not like top secret news or anything. It's been out there for over a decade. I come from a family of writers. My dad's the novelist Stephen King. And I always wanted to be a writer.
Never heard of him.
Yeah, Stephen who?
He's a guy who shows tremendous promise. He's written a couple books. They've done pretty well, and
I've heard of Tabitha King and I've heard of Owen King. I don't know who this pretender is.
I come from this whole family of amazing writers, My mother's an amazing writer. My brother is. About the time I was 13, 14, I knew I wanted to be a writer, and I started writing every day. And I've written every day of my life since I was about 14. I think I probably produced about 35 pages a week since I got to high school. When I was 18 or 19, I began to think, I come from this famous family, and I have this famous last name, and it occurred to me that might be a disadvantage, not a benefit to me. Because I felt like there was too much potential that I would write a mediocre novel, and that a publisher would see a chance to make a quick buck in the last name, and would publish a book that wasn't very good. And you can fool readers once, but you can't fool them twice. And my feeling was that if this mediocre novel was published and readers looked at it, they'd say, rightly, he only got published because he has a famous dad. I'm never going to waste my time with him again. And I wanted to have I couldn't imagine myself doing anything else. And I wanted to have the longest, best possible career. And I felt like the only way to do that was to provide people with stories that really, truly excited them, where it didn't matter who my parents were. It didn't matter what my history was. All that mattered was they were into what was happening and they wanted to know what would happen next. So I abandoned my last name and I started writing as Joe Hill. And over 10 years, I wrote 4 novels that I was never able to sell, and dozens of short stories that I wasn't able to sell. And I collected my the mandatory 1,000 rejection letters. And actually, the joke is that after writing 4 novels, I actually began to think probably I didn't have the talent or ability to be a novelist, that I had taken my swing and struck out and, lost my shot. But I had written some short stories that had appeared in little literary magazines, and some of them had won some prizes or got prize buzz. And one of these short stories was noticed by a talent scout at Marvel Comics, who invited me to write a Spider-Man story. Wow. And I remember feeling like I really wanted to be a novelist. This was my life stream. It didn't work out. It's not happening. But I've got a foot in the door over in the comic book business. And if I wind up writing Ghost Rider and, The Flash, that could be a pretty great life. I still get to tell stories and play make-believe for a living, and that would be terrific. So I started writing in comics. I was really a comic book writer before I was a novelist. Around the same time, I had 15 pretty good short stories. I couldn't sell them to any publisher in America. I couldn't sell them to any of the big publishers in England. A very small press in England, PS Publishing, took a chance on the book of stories because the editor there was himself a short story writer in the genre of the fantastic and horror fiction. And they did 1,000 copies, and it won some awards and got some buzz. I was able to sell a novel shortly afterwards. And then eventually it came out about my pen name. As soon as I started doing public appearances, people started to look at me and say, boy, doesn't he kind of look like, and so, but it didn't really matter. At that point, it didn't really matter because I had what I needed for my self-confidence and my own, I needed to believe that I could do it, that I didn't need to lean on a family name, that people would enjoy my fiction for what it was, as opposed to, thinking, oh, this is cool because his dad is someone famous and
that's brilliant.
That's not much fun.
It's such an inspiring story. And it must have been, it would have been so easy to go down that route of trying to use your dad's name as a way of starting your career. And massive props to you for, 10 years. There must have been times during that. What were some of the points where you just thought, it's never going to happen?
Well, I remember I had sent several stories to C. Michael Curtis, the senior fiction editor at the Atlantic Monthly. And he had written me back personal notes. He had never published anything, but he had written back some stuff. I remember I sent them a story that I thought was pretty good. And this is the old days. This was like almost pre-internet. And so I would send out a physical story, not a digital manuscript. And when they sent it back, I would physically get back my manuscript so I could use it again. I would include a self-stamped return mailer. Wow, and they would send it back in that. So I would always get my story back. And I sent one of my best stories to the Atlantic, and I got back an envelope instead of my mailer with my short story in it. And it was just the right size to contain a check. And I thought, holy shit, I've done it. I just got published by the Atlantic Monthly. And I was married at the time, and this was like, again, pre-cell phones. I didn't own a cell phone. No one did. And I went outside to the payphone, and I called the woman I was married to. I called my wife, and I said, oh my God, I think the Atlantic Monthly published me. I'm holding an envelope. And she said, oh my God, that's the best. You've got to tear it open and read it to me. And I said, oh, this is the best. This is the best. And she said, I'm so proud. I said, I just don't believe it. And I tore it open, and it was a photocopied foreign rejection. And scribbled at the bottom was a note that said, sorry, we lost your story.
Oh, no. Oh, unbelievable.
And that was it. And I remember that was such a tremendous kick in the nuts that I remember thinking, I'm pretty much done. It's never happening. The other thing I did spend 3 years writing this giant epic fantasy novel called The Fear Tree. And I thought I hit it out of the park. I thought this thing was a smash. And it got turned down by every publisher in America, and it got turned down by every publisher in England, and for an extra kick in the pants, it got turned down by every publisher in Canada. And my dad had read the book, and he loved the book, and he was always very supportive of the pen name. But I remember him saying when that got turned down, maybe the deck was stacked too much. And I knew what he was saying, and I said, Dad, I think I would rather fail with the pen name than succeed, knowing that I broke in using the family. And he said, okay. And dropped the subject, never brought it up again. So, and after The Fear Tree, it was still, I think, probably another 3 or 4 years before I finally did sell 20th Century Ghosts in heart-shaped box.
I think it's amazing as well, because we often talk to authors about the high points of their career, the moment where they held that first book in their hand. But with such an incredible army of writers out there, it's good to hear that, the low points as well, because the fact you came back from that, what was the thing that kept you going, though, at that point where you could have probably just smashed that public phone box?
What kept me going? I think I was absolutely unfit to do anything else. And I also think at that point, at a certain point, I realized I had written, I say I had written 4 novels, but actually going back to when I was 14, I probably wrote 12. Because I wrote my first book when I was 14 years old. I wrote this thing about a private high school where the administration was a gang of satanic devil worshippers, and that the cafeteria was serving the beef stroganoff was actually human bodies. That was a book called Midnight Eats, and I wrote that when I was 14. So I probably wrote something like 12 novels between the time I was 14 and the time when I finally got published, which was 35. And I think at about the age of 28, 29, I thought, there's no way I'm quitting because I put way too much time into this. You know, after this long, it's no longer acceptable to screw it up. Although, like I say, that's one side. There was the bravado side, which is like, I'd never quit. You know, I'm going to die doing this.
If you hadn't been published, would you still be writing now? Would you be self-publishing, do you think?
I don't know if I ever would have gone for self-publishing, because for me, personally, I needed the validation of an editor. You know, that I think self-publishing would have seemed like cheating to me. You know, that somehow that's not doing it right. That's not how you're supposed to do it. So I think I needed someone to say, yes, you're good enough, that I could never have been the kind of person who could say to himself, you're good enough, that this is good enough. I needed some sort of outer validation.
I guess you're the only person in the world that when your dad says you're good enough, you have to go, yeah, but you would say that, you're my dad.
Yeah, well, I'm sure that's what everyone's, right? Isn't that, don't your parents always say, you're a genius?
Well, absolutely. So it must have been doubly hard for you because, you know, you have to hear it externally. I mean, that's actually been a theme we've heard from. It's that moment of belief that is almost the spark for every successful writer's journey, where they truly, it might be an inner belief, but it's also sometimes that external validation. Who was it that gave you that validation, would you say? Can you remember pinpointing the moment where you thought this is going to happen?
There were three people, but I want to say something, Mark D. I want to go back to something you said in the very first podcast of the Bestseller Experiment, where you said when you work with people who are trying to achieve a dream, you make a point to remind them that, you know, the moment they're writing the first sentence, they're already doing it. They're already having the dream, that the dream is not the end result, but the dream is getting there. You know, and I always think like what mattered about the Beatles. I'm a big Beatles guy. Sooner or later, every conversation comes back to the Beatles. Okay. You know, we look at Sgt. Pepper and we say, that was the moment. That was the moment it all came together. It's not true. The moment was playing every single night in Hamburg in the clubs. That was the moment. That was when they became the Beatles, before anyone knew anything about them except that they were this bar band that made a good noise every single night. So I think, you know, the stories that matter are the ones that you didn't sell. You know, that's how you created the first and most difficult creation of any artist's career, which is the invention of yourself. You know, that's the process. Inventing yourself is the real challenge. And then after that, the novels are easy.
Yeah, it's incredible you say that, because I almost feel like we have to become experts at creating characters in our stories. But what's the character we create in our own story of life? You know, that's the big one. And it's great to hear you mention about that first episode, because I think a lot of people, you know, it's about plugging away and keep on going, but in realizing that you are living the dream. I mean, would you say that it's become harder since you became successful and published? Or, you know, do you still kind of tap in daily about living this life, living this dream as a full-time writer?
I would say it got a lot easier after I got on antidepressants. I had a lot of struggles with paranoia and anxiety. And actually, after I had this totally cliched thing where I had, you know, Heart-Shaped Box came out and it was a huge bestseller, and it was actually bigger than anything I had ever imagined. It sort of hit my daydream, cleared the bar of my daydreams, and then some, you know. And so I immediately had a meltdown and couldn't handle it, and you know, had like a kind of nervous breakdown and wound up divorced and terrifically unhappy and full of paranoid ideas. And it was a bit of a struggle, actually, sort of getting back together. The last 2 or 3 years have been, you know, some of the happiest, best writing I've done in my life. It's been great.
Fantastic. And you mentioned there were 3 people. You were going to mention 3 people that kind of...
Right, who gave me validation. 3 people that really mattered. The first was this talent scout at Marvel Comics, Teresa Falker-Isle. Well, actually, the first was probably Stephen Jones, who is a Best New Horror anthology. He picked my story, 20th Century Ghost. His acceptance of that story led directly to a talent scout at Marvel Comics giving me a shot to write Spider-Man. And for me, that was my big... I mean, it sounds corny, but writing an 11-page Spider-Man story was my big break. But I loved comics, and Marvel Comics was like a real publisher, you know? And so there was that. And then finally, and most importantly, Peter Crowther at PS Publishing, who decided to publish my first book. Yeah.
So Mark, you're going to tell Joe about this kind of problem we've got with our novel right now?
Just the one.
How's it going? How many pages do you guys got?
We're up to about 55,000 words. It's very rough. It's really, really rough.
In all senses of the
matter.
world. Yeah.
That's fine.
But we're getting there. Our original idea was, certainly before Christmas, we were saying, we'll write 3 chapters, then we'll do a really interesting synopsis. We'll give that to an editor. The editor will look at it and give us some structural notes. But what's happened is there's so many moving parts in this thing, and we're still learning who these characters are, that we're up to like 50-something thousand words now. And we're kind of close to a very, very rough, very long outline, which we're then going to have to go back and tidy up because it's just like a complete mess.
Good. You've got the book right where you want it.
Exactly.
That's great. That's great. Because someone said, I can fix a crappy page. I can't fix a blank page.
I love it.
Exactly, yeah. And it's interesting because Mark and I've been writing since I was a kid. And I've been writing stories and plays and scripts and all sorts of screenplays, So I'm, it's something I love and I enjoy and I'm very passionate about. My colleague here, Mr. DeVoe, has been writing for a long time too, but you've never got past that 20,000 word mark, have you?
That's
right.
You have now.
Well, with the help of Mark.
But what I'm finding is, and you've confessed this before, Mark, which is you have this, there's a new idea over there. Let's go chase it.
Oh, totally.
And,
yeah,
and I'm like, no, can we just get to the end of this first, please? Oh, no, there's another one. There's another one over there. There's a new idea. No, can we just finish this bastard first? hey, I've had this idea. And the annoying thing is, a lot of them are really good ideas.
Yeah, I like to chase the new idea too, Mark.
I love it. I was going to say, what do you do when that happens?
I like to chase the new idea too.
What happens when you get the new idea, Joe? How do you deal with that and not get distracted?
See, I don't. My first drafts are full of material that I'll cut out later. In fact, a lot of times I think I'm getting faster. I'm much faster now, but it used to take me about 3 years to write a book. And sometimes I would think it took me 2 years to write the first third of the book, and then about 6 months to write the other 2/3. And the reason why was I would churn out so much material figuring out who these people are and just getting them talking to each other and trying to hear the sound of their voice, the specific way each character talks. I'm very sort of oral. And if I could find their voice, I could figure out everything else I needed to know about them. And then eventually it would get to a point where I was so comfortable with the characters, I could plop them into any scene and figure out how they would solve a problem, how they would react to difficulties. So that's always what I'm trying to look for. And so on that level, I don't care how much material I churn out, a fun new situation is always worth exploring, even if a lot of them don't make it into the finished book. So my basic rule when I get to the second draft is every time I look at a chapter, a scene, I say to myself, what's awesome about this scene? If I was a reader, what's so awesome I couldn't wait to get to the next page? And I need to see that in every page. Really, I need to see it in every paragraph because I'm so scared a reader will put down the book. I just thrive on fear. There's so many distractions. There's so much great stuff on YouTube. And you guys haven't really thought about what you're getting into. You ever looked at Netflix? Do you see how much great stuff there is on Netflix? Why would anyone read your book if they could watch Netflix? Exactly. Do you know what's on YouTube? Do you see Apple streaming music? All the Oscar movies are out. Why would anyone waste their time on your book? You've got to give them an amazing reason to keep reading every page, and I'm just absolutely ruthless about saying, if I don't think there's something just mind-blowingly awesome in this chapter, it's gotta go. And it's amazing how easy the stuff that's not awesome just drops right out of the book. You can just, it's like turning someone upside down and shaking the change out of their pockets. It's just all that stuff you don't need just drops.
That is awesome approach. And it reminds me, it's like doing things differently with, like, instead of saying what's crap about this, what's not working, which is where everyone goes, right? They're all like, oh, let's just remove all the crap. It's actually saying, what do I love? And then everything else just, it's a bit like the Marie Kondo's way of decluttering your house, apparently. What sparks joy?
What gives you joy? Every page, that's right. Every single page. You have to defend why it's awesome. And this should be easier because there's 2 of you. So there's one of you to say it's not awesome. Tell me why this is awesome. And the other to defend it. And if you can't persuade the other person, boom, it's gone. Gotta go.
Yeah, good idea. Go. I think we'll adopt that, Mark. What do you reckon?
That's fascinating because we had an example of that just this week. Okay, you wrote a scene between two characters which you sent to me, and I said, okay, there's nothing really happening here. It's an interesting scene, two people talking to each other, but our protagonist, she doesn't come out of this with anything that she didn't have before. She walks into a room, has a conversation, comes out, nothing has happened. And I said to you, make it work harder. No.
Did they hurt each other? No? Gotta go.
No. Yeah.
It was my attempt.
I said,
I was going to say it's my attempt at starting love interest in the book.
Right. Then it's even more important that they hate each other.
I said, make it work harder. And you came up with a MacGuffin that I think is going to be the linchpin of the whole novel now, Mark. You know, I think, this is, and I was working on it today, and it sparked new ideas in me. So I think that back and forth, having those two minds at each other is helping us. I say that now, but yeah.
Right. It's the power of two, He says, I've got the first two lines. She was just 17. She was no beauty queen. And then one of you has got to say, no, that's a crap line, And so you think some more and then say, you know what I mean.
We know what I mean.
And suddenly it's like, ooh, that's filthy. That's great. This is the whole thing from The Power of Two, this Josh Shrink book, where it's like, whoa, that's electrifying. But that's because you're good fencing partners.
That's fantastic. I know you're a massive Beatles fan, and I also know that you're very much into the kind of Brit explosion in the 70s.
Yeah, British invasion.
Have you ever drawn any? Because I'm my background is I've kind of come from the music industry as a recording artist. Have you, Joe, ever drawn any comparisons about music and books which kind of made some big moments in your writing?
Yeah, I will say that I have successfully managed to work into my Beatles versus Stones argument into every single book. And sooner or later, Beatles versus Stones comes up.
Brilliant.
I'm a big British invasion guy. I mean, the Kinks, the Who, Faces, I live and die by this stuff. And, and even the later stuff, I mean, I love Oasis. I mean, it's sort of horrible to think, but I mean, wasn't Oasis the best band of the 90s?
Yeah.
My first book borrowed the title of a Nirvana song, it's Heart-Shaped Boxes.
I wondered if that was, because I love that track.
Absolutely.
I love that track.
Absolutely. But if you ask me what's the better song, I Hate Myself and I Want to Die or Live Forever by Oasis, it's no contest. Live Forever. Absolutely.
Yeah. So do you listen to...
What were we talking about?
I was going to say, what do you listen to when you write? Do you actually listen to kind of Beatles or...
Okay, so do you want to hear my new one weird amazing trick? Doesn't it sound like one of these things you click on the internet that you shouldn't click on? My one weird amazing trick.
It will amaze you.
I do this one amazing trick to get in the mood to write. It's never fails. Tremendously successful. Just, I sit down, boom, words start to flow. I play piano for a half hour before I write.
Wow.
And I'm a terrible pianist, dreadful pianist. But I play piano and I work at it for half an hour and it seems to clear my head and put me into a different mind space. And then when I sit down, it just flows.
Isn't it?
No thought, no second guessing, just...
I bet
you are kind of exercising a creative muscle then, aren't you? So it's a warm-up. It's clearly triggering something.
That's what I think. I think it's a warm-up. I think it's a lateral move. It's connected to writing and reading. I mean, I'm reading notes and there's expression, but it's nonverbal. It's this completely nonverbal thing. And somehow it does something to prime the motor.
Awesome stuff. So have you got any other life hackers to share with us, Joe? Have you got any other kind of clever things you do to get going?
I was thinking about how do you write a bestseller? What do you do that makes a bestseller? And I know some stuff, and it's totally useless. It won't help you even the tiniest bit.
Come on, bring it.
Bring it.
Okay. The best thing that you can do to have a successful big bestseller is to get your book praised publicly in a high-profile media space by a big influencer. So this morning, on the front page of the New York Times, they ran an article about Barack Obama's reading and about how the president's reading helped keep him sane and grounded during the 8 years he was president. Yeah. And he mentioned a science fiction novel called The Three-Body Problem. Now, I don't know what the Amazon sales rank for The Three-Body Problem was yesterday, but today, at the time of this recording, it's number 50 on Amazon's list. So the president loved it. He said so publicly, and it became a huge bestseller. And that is not the first time this has happened. Students of literary
Ian Fleming
history,
and Kennedy, wasn't it?
Right.
Yeah.
Well, remember that when Kennedy was asked what he liked, he said he enjoyed the spy thrillers of Ian Fleming, and the rest is history.
From Russia with Love, yeah.
So if you get on over here, we had the Oprah show, that's over. But if you can get noticed by someone, Bill Gates, Mark Zuckerberg, Barack Obama, Donald Trump, someone who has a big media clout, I don't think that Donald Trump has ever read a novel, so it's not likely he's going to.
We could play him the audiobook.
Yeah. We have history with Mr. Trump.
The other thing that I would say, the other way that the one I'm certain, absolutely certain, that it will help sell books if you can get on TV. So over here we have the Today Show. Over there you guys have like the Punch and Judy Show or the Richard and Judy Show or the something like that. You know, and if they pick your book and you get on, that's a big bestseller. It's Punch and is it Punch and Judy? Something like that, right? Don't tell me.
Richard and Judy. Yeah,
right. Punch and Judy. So that's what I thought. So
that's just when they have arguments.
If you get on that show, you're gonna sell books.
Yeah.
Does this help you?
Absolutely. Yeah. The question is how.
Well, really?
I mean, certainly we will be self-publishing. That's the thing. This is the only way we can do it in a year is we self-publish and we publish on Kindle and Apple and that kind of thing. Getting high-profile people to read it and praise it. I mean, you know, when you see, you know, quotes from Lee Child on the cover or Stephen King, you know, it adds a kudos to a book and gets people picking it up. So that
I don't know if that's
help.
good enough.
It definitely does help.
Yeah, I don't know if it helps much.
You need a president. Yeah, presidential level at least.
You have to go for it.
Lee Child and Stephen King is good, but they blurb a lot of books, and a lot of books they blurb don't become bestsellers. I mean, you got to have, you know, Barack's got to say something, man.
Maybe we could invite him on the podcast now that he's kind of be kicking around.
I mean, I'm trying to think like who could Mark Zuckerberg. Mark Zuckerberg's book club kicks books. True. You know,
actually, these days it's vloggers. You know, Zoella, the vlogger over here, she has a book deal thing with W.H. Smith's, the book retail chain.
Oh,
and
really?
you know, one word from her and a book shoots up the charts. So Zoella might be, and you know, our book has a female protagonist. Actually, Michelle Obama. We should get it to Michelle Obama.
Joe, who was the most influential kind of media that kind of promoted you in the States? Is there a big name out there that everyone kind of goes after?
You know, Neil Gaiman said about Heart-Shaped Box that he loved the book unreservedly. And they put that quote on the back cover, and I'm sure it sold, you know, and my, you know, I sort of was coming from comic books, and I write a kind of scary, dark fantasy that in some ways is more similar to Neil's than to my dad's. And so I wanted to steal Neil Gaiman's audience. And he said, sure, let me help you with that, and gave the book a big quote. So I would say that Neil Gaiman was helpful.
Because I remember seeing that video of him recommending the book. It was like a Google Play video. Awesome. Really.
You know, Janet Maslin has reviewed all the books in the New York Times, and she said some really terrific things about them. And I would say a good review from a high-profile reviewer can still move a couple copies. I mean, I don't know, you know, that it will make you a bestseller. Every little bit helps. I don't really know why the books have sold well. And I think, and this is the flaw in your experiment, not to bum you out, but I think trying to predict what's going to become a bestseller is a little bit like trying to predict which direction a flock of sparrows are going to fly in. You kind of can't do it because the readership is this giant, unpredictable crowd. You know, you don't know what someone is going to write, and suddenly that's going to electrify everyone because it's exactly what we needed to be talking about. The only thing you can do, I had a track coach, and we asked once, you know, when I was in high school, I asked my track coach, what's the best way to win a race? And he said, if you start strong and then you run powerfully through the middle section of the race and then put on a final burst of speed at the end, you'll have a good race. You know? And that's kind of how I feel like the only thing you can do is if you just open your book with an absolutely mind-blowing powerhouse beginning, and then if the next 250 pages are completely irresistible, winding up to a brain-smashing, I never saw that coming ending, you'll be fine. There's nothing, if you just do that, that's you'll sell some copies. It'll be all right.
So when you sit down to write, Joe, and you're actually kind of going through that process, are you very conscious when you're writing of, I mean, you talk about when you look through it and you pick out the bits, but when you actually sit down to write, are you very conscious of, I have to go in with a firework display here, or I have to kind of end this chapter on an absolute cliffhanger?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think so.
Yeah.
I think, when I finish a chapter, there better be a reason to start the next one.
Right.
So you always sort of try to end it in the way that Chandler discussed with the man coming through the door with a gun.
Yeah.
I might have lifted that from one of your first podcasts, actually. I think you guys talked about that in the first podcast.
Yeah.
Every chapter, a man comes through the door with a gun.
The other one I quote all the time is Billy Wilder. Billy Wilder talked about that final act. He said, you build and build and build and build and build, and that's it. Get out as soon as you can.
On a practical level, I think, dialogue, people would rather read dialogue than big blocks of description. And if you have characters with interesting voices, those pages will fly. When you put two people in a room and they each have interesting voices and they're not going to be nice to each other, those pages tend to fly, because there's some sort of magpie part of our brains that want the gossip. It doesn't matter. These people don't really exist. We want to hear, he said that? She said what? We can't help it. And so when you get, especially if they have a really distinctive, fun way of talking, I've always tried to look for a way to make the characters verbally fun. C.S. Lewis does this too. If you go through the C.S., like Reepicheep's dialogue is really, really fun. The Pensives, they say great things. And Prince Caspian, I think, Edmund says to Peter, do you really think you can beat him? And he says, I don't know. That's why we're going to fight. That's what we're going to fight to find out. And it's just such a great way to end a chapter. It's such a great little line.
That's amazing. And I think there's so much that we can draw from the classics. And what I love about some of the reviews you get, they talk about the horror aspect of the book, but then you hear that I saw one big thing that just said, fun. So you're obviously kind of consciously trying to make your books humorous as well as scary, right?
Have you ever watched the Marvel movies? I mean, like all the Marvel superhero films, each one of those films is like a textbook in great storytelling. Yeah. And I read a review where someone said every Marvel movie is just quip, quip, punch, quip, quip, punch. And I thought, yeah, what's wrong with that? That works pretty good.
Absolutely.
And I really think it's the old, Pauline Kael said about, movies are kiss, kiss, bang, bang, and so I just want to, another way of saying, is this chapter awesome, is to look at it and say, is there a kiss? Is there a bang? No? Gotta go.
Well, no, I mean, this is just a golden masterclass. I mean, it's... We've asked lots of writers about their tips for writing and starting out their writing habits, but very soon we will be embarking on a second draft. You've already given us, I think, a couple of tips on second drafts, but when you go into rewrites, what's your mindset there? What are you looking out for? Short
chapters and short sentences. If a chapter is going to go on, it better be going on because it's awesome, because it's so awesome. Someone is being dragged behind a truck and their skin is getting flayed off and, they're trying to, wiggle out of the handcuffs. I mean, something like that. That's the only reason I can think to have a chapter go any longer than 3 pages. I think, you can't underrate how much people like short things. Short chapters, short sentences, short skirts. A 7-minute pop song is never going to fly. Let's keep it 2.5 minutes. Don't bore us, get to the chorus. There has to be a good reason. If you're going to go long, if you're going to write a sentence that goes on for like a full page, or if you're going to do like a 20-page discursive chapter, there better be a damn good reason for it. I'm not saying you can't do it. Although, if you're writing an entertainment, sorry, you can't do it. If you're writing literary fiction, that's different, but you guys aren't. You guys want to write something that's, where the pages are going to fly and, or I guess it'll be an ebook, so it'll be like the button will,
swipe
because someone's pressing it. By the way, when I said that I read bestsellers, I also pay very close attention to what sells in ebooks, top sellers in ebooks, because that's become an increasingly important part of the market and reveals something about readers it's like the mask has come off and we've seen this hidden face, this whole hidden demographic of what people, one thing I would point out is clearly people really like to read dirty fiction, you know, and they didn't like doing it when they had to read a book where it was like naked people on the cover, but if they can read it in an anonymous device, they dig, we dig the, you know, the people undressed,
absolutely
monkeying around, you know.
So Joe, tell us about your some of your kind of writing habits. Are you a very kind of structured writer? Do you get up and you're at the desk at a certain time, or are you kind of more just as and when it happens?
Well, it's kind of gone through a little bit of a transition recently because for about 3 or 4 years, I was doing all my first drafts longhand. Prior to that, I had done most of my work directly into the computer. And then I went through this whole phase of really enjoying just the notebook and being disconnected, you know, no Twitter, no text messages. I put on my vinyl and I write longhand. I found that terrific. So I wrote the last 12 issues of my comic book longhand. I wrote the Fireman longhand. I wrote 3 of the 4 novellas in the upcoming book longhand. And it was just this terrific, it was terrifically satisfying way to work. However, I have gone back to the computer and that's been a real rush. It's been like I spent years running with weights and now I've put the weights down and I'm working without them. And that's pretty exciting.
Excellent.
You know? Writing longhand was like resistance training.
Yeah.
But in terms of my pattern, you know, I expect to get between 1,500 and 3,000 words every day. More and more, I find myself looking for 3,000, not 1,500. We've got some deadlines to keep. Let's go ahead and make them. You know, and I've been a lot more relaxed, so it's been a little easier to get my pages in.
Excellent stuff.
Talking about relaxing, Joe, I mean, you touched on this earlier, and this is something not enough writers talk about, is a lot of writers are anxious people. They do have mental health problems. Are there exercises that you do? I mean, is playing the piano, is that helping you get into a certain mindset? Are there things that you do that help, you know, if you've got a deadline or whatever, or an anxiety? Is there something you can do that gets you, that brings you down, that calms you down?
Playing piano has been terrific because prior to that, mostly what I did was I would go out for a long drive and find someone's pet, and then I'd strangle it in a ditch, you know. And I generally found that killing pets, you know, killing animals in the wild seemed to stir something, you know, keep me motivated. But this is less, that leads to, you can have awkward conversations and visits from people in uniforms and stuff. So the piano has been a huge step forward. I don't know, you know, I mean, like, I've been doing it for a long time. I guess my trick when I sit down is I decide this first paragraph is only going to have 3 sentences in it. And the first sentence is going to have like 3 or 4 words. It's just going to be like a 3 or 4 word sentence. You know, you can come up with 2 words, you know, and I love I always think like a 2-word sentence is like a hammer and a nail, you know, boom, you know, tires smoked, thunder boomed. I love that. I mean, I just think that has, for the reader, it's a real kick in the pants, you know, so I try to get started by working and I'm not thinking about the whole day of work. I'm not thinking about the whole scene. I'm just thinking about what's one awesome sentence I could put on the page. You know, what's the next awesome sentence I could put down? And I just want to find, you know, that one little 4 or 5 word sentence where the reader will feel a little bit like I didn't think that was going to be the next thing I'd read. You know, I sometimes think Norman Mailer used to compare it to a boxing match. And I sometimes think it is a little bit like that. And it's almost like you're beating the reader. Why a reader would pay to be pummeled, I don't know. But that's kind of it. You know, you're kind of trying to stick them again and again. Boom, boom, boom. You know, here's another one. You didn't see that coming. Boom.
That's brilliant. I love that.
Well, I think it goes back to what you said about it being a visceral experience. You know, you're sitting and listening to 2 people having an argument, or you're sitting there listening, waiting for the juice, you know. And I think a good novel should take you through. It should be like a roller coaster ride or a boxing match or whatever. You know, the best books I've read are ones where I've come out of it kind of reeling, you know. I think, you know, if we can get halfway there, then we're onto something.
Well, you know, I think like, so if you're writing a mystery, you know, there's a temptation to have a scene where someone will call someone up on the phone for information. Okay, but that's not awesome. We've seen that scene in a million movies. Why do they have to talk on the phone? Can't you have them talk someplace more interesting? What if one of them checks safety on a roller coaster and they have to have the conversation on a roller coaster? Can't you put them somewhere else? What if one of them, get them off the phone? Don't have them talk in the kitchen. I can't imagine anything more boring than that. Have them talk someplace interesting. And then it's right away you have to figure out why they don't like each other. They do like each other? That's not that interesting. When people like each other, it's boring. So why, that your detective is trying to get information out of this woman and she hates him for why does she hate him? Does she hate him because she just doesn't like his face? She doesn't like his car. He comes to her neighborhood in that car, showing off that how much wealthier he is than everyone in the neighborhood. What's his deal? What's his problem? Looking down on her. Why does he look down on her? You've got to have conflict. You've got to have friction. Or maybe she's really lonely and she likes the guy, and then it's like an uncomfortable seduction or something. But there has to be it can't just be he needs information and she's going to give it to him. That's boring.
That's excellent advice. And I'm gonna take all that on board, especially our kitchen scene, Mark, eh?
People talking in the kitchen? Terrible.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Chapter 1.
It's gone. But dead to me.
So
there's no reason. The thing that I say in a lot of writing workshops is people will start a story with someone waking up, turning off the alarm, and opening the fridge. There's no reason for us to hear about him opening the fridge unless there's a severed head. If there's a severed head in the fridge, I want to know. Otherwise, let's move it along.
Love it. That's awesome. So, Joe, tell me what if you could pick one piece of advice that you got from your dad? Is there kind of like one piece of advice that's really stuck and lived with you throughout your writing career?
Yeah, that's a pretty common question. Is what's the best piece of advice you got? Variations of the what's the best piece of advice you got. Well, I want people to keep listening to the bestseller experiment because they're going to get a lot of good advice. They're going to learn a lot from the podcast, and I'm following along too because I'm a little behind. I'm not up to the current episode, but I'm also interested to see what I can learn. But now I'm going to say something which is a little bit of a bummer, which is I've had lots of good advice from my mom, from my dad, from various mentors, from very experienced writers. But I never really learned any of the things I needed to know from the advice of other people. Everything I learned about good writing, I learned from reading a lot of good books. That's basically how I got it. And we talked earlier, I mentioned that I had a little bit of a nervous breakdown after my first novel. I was in a really bad place and I started all these books that I couldn't get going. And I had another book due and it was a year overdue and then it was 2 years overdue and things were getting pretty bleak. And at a certain point, I said, fuck it, I can't write my own novels. I'm all done writing my novel. I can't do it anymore. Here's what I'm going to do instead. And I got a copy of one of my favorite novels, Elmore Leonard's The Big Bounce. And so every day I would sit down and I would write 4 pages from The Big Bounce. I copied it sentence by sentence, page after page. And then as I went along, I started to change sentences or to add material. And I had this idea I was going to finish it and then release it for free on the internet. It was going to be called The Bigger Bounce.
Brilliant.
After I got about 20 pages in, I would sit down and I would write 4 pages of The Big Bounce by Elmore Leonard, just copying his words, his sentences, his rhythm, his dialogue, the feel of his characters. Then I would push it to the side and I would start writing Horns, which was the second novel. Horns isn't anything like Elmore Leonard. I don't believe for a second that anyone can look at that book and see echoes of Elmore Leonard in it. But in the process of working on Elmore Leonard's material, I found I could make a transition to my own voice, that it loosened me up. It loosened up stiff muscles. And at a certain point, when I was about 80 or 100 pages into rewriting The Big Bounce, I quit working on Elmore Leonard and just gave myself over full time to Horns. So if you want to learn how to be a good writer, I would say find a book where you say, this book is it, and read it again. And then read it again with a highlighter and a pencil. Count words. How many words did he put in each paragraph? When he has dialogue, how long does his dialogue generally go? Does he write a page of dialogue? Does he only write 3 or 4 exchanges? What's going on? Know that book inside out. And if you have to, rewrite it. Sit there and work on it, rewrite it, physically run his sentences through your brain or her sentences through your brain. You will learn rhythm. You will learn how to dance. You're copying someone else's dance moves and learning them for yourself. And eventually you will be able to dance your own dance.
Wow, that is incredible, Joe. Do you know, in the music world, it's so amazing listening to you say that because that's exactly what I do in the music world. And I call it, in the music world, I call it templating, and it's like going to somebody and buying the architectural plans. But when you create the house, you design it completely differently. You have a different interior, and it is completely different, right?
It's been 10 minutes since we talked about the Beatles. So let's talk about the Beatles again, right? What did they do when they were in Hamburg? They didn't play their own compositions. Yeah. They played Chuck Berry. Covers. They played the girl bands that they were loving. And they played those songs, and they played those songs, and they played those songs, and they began to write their own songs. And by the time they were writing their own songs, they knew the structure of a 3-minute rock and roll tune inside and out. They knew all the tricks. They knew all the vocal intonations that would elicit an emotional reaction. Students of Go who learn how to play the game of Go traditionally are not allowed to play their own game of Go when they begin studying. Instead, they have to play their way through 100 games, 100 classic games of Go, playing both sides of the board and working from a booklet that shows what moves were made to learn the moves of the masters before they even begin with their own stuff.
Awesome.
It's a good way to learn.
That's brilliant. I absolutely love that. So, Joe, we thought it'd be fun to ask you if you could help us pick out our winner. We were running a Michael Connolly competition to win his hardback of his latest novel. And we've had incredible number of entries, but we thought if we press this magic button...
So it's a signed Michael Connolly first edition?
It's a signed, hardback of his most recent number one.
So I'm going to count down and then
It's the UK hardback.
So I'm going to count down... And then I'm going to read the name of the person who won the first edition signed Michael Connolly.
That's it. I'm going to press a button and the name will appear. Okay, here we go.
Okay. 3, 2, 1. Joe Hill. Oh my God!
Who'd have thunk it?
Oh my God! Guys, do you want my shipping address? That's so cool. I don't even remember signing up to... No, you're not going to let me have it?
Do you know, I question, I think you're an amazing writer, Joe, but I question your reading skills. It's actually quite close. It was quite close, wasn't it? The name that's in the messaging window that came up is quite close.
It's Joan P. Quinn. Joan P. Quinn, come on down. You've won a signed Michael Connolly.
Hey. Congratulations, Joan. We'll be getting that off to you in the post very soon. And thank you for everyone for entering. And listen, if you didn't win this time, if your name wasn't Joan, we have a number of other amazing competitions to give away. So get to our website, look for the win navigation, click a link. We've got about 4 or 5 live right now with equally, including Joe, Bryan Cranston's underpants, tighty whities. How awesome is that?
Wow.
Now there's a prize.
Wow.
Unused, I should say.
Great. That's terrific. That's terrific. I won't be able to get right over to sign up for that, unfortunately, but I envy the people who will be taking home the Fruit of the Looms.
Yeah. You say unused, Mark.
The Fruit of the Looms of glory.
I did wear them briefly for the photo shoot for the competition.
Briefly.
So they're slightly soiled.
That's good. That's good.
Okay. Good talking, you guys.
That's brilliant. Thanks, chaps.
Question of the week is from Josh Atkinson on Twitter, AJ Atkinson Oct, who tweets us twice a day, Joe, with his word count. He's our favorite tweeter.
That's so great.
And here's the thing. You've kind of answered this question already, okay? He said, any advice on extending chapters? For some reason, no matter what happens, I end at 1,500 to 2,000 words.
Good.
Now, I'm worried by his use of the word extending there, because I think a chapter is as long as it needs to be, and you were talking earlier about short, punchy chapters. But do you ever find this? Do you ever find yourself coming up short and thinking this should be longer?
My favorite chapter in Heart-Shaped Box is 1 sentence long. So people love a short chapter. I would love to do a book that's 100 chapters long and every chapter is only like 1 paragraph.
Yeah.
I think that could be such a great book, with illustrations or something. I just think that would be terrific. What's wrong with why? I would say if every chapter is 1,500 words or 2,000 words, that's terrific because it shows consistency. When I sit down to write, I generally want to write a complete scene in one sitting. And I'm always a little uncomfortable if I feel like I've only gotten halfway through a scene, not because I have a problem with starting mid-scene the next day, but because I feel like, oops, it's going on too long. What's happened here? Why wasn't I able to get through this scene? And usually if a scene goes on too long, it's because you started it too early.
Do you think consistency might be a problem if every chapter is 2,000 words long or 5,000
No, I think that's
words?
great. No, I think
Is that
that's great.
okay? You don't think that's going to be too monotonous? You don't want to break it up with shorter chapters?
No, you're keeping
chapters?
it steady. I mean, not in first draft anyway. I mean, if you want to, if you start to worry, wow, every chapter is 3 pages, then again, I'd probably use it. I'd probably, instead of running from it, I'd probably say, great, every chapter is 3 pages. Now I'm going to go through the book, and that 2-page chapter I'm going to add to, and the 4-page chapter I'm going to cut. I would rather... I'd rather use something like that consistency than run from it. Yeah, it sounds great. I wouldn't worry about it.
Cool. Cool stuff.
Here's a thought for you guys. I wonder if it's crossed your mind. Has it crossed your mind the bestseller experiment might succeed, but that it might not be your success? That it might actually...
Oh, yeah.
That the bestseller experiment might lead to a bestseller. It just might not be yours.
This is the only reason I'm doing it, Joe. I think this is going to be a complete disaster. I've said that from day one, but I'm convinced there's someone out there who will beat us to it, who will have a book that maybe they've had sitting in the drawer for 10 years. And we're hearing this a lot on Twitter. People saying, this is great. I've started writing again. And I'm convinced there's going to be someone out there who beats us to it. And if they do, job done. I'll be so happy.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'll be over the moon.
Yeah, I think that's highly likely, and it would be awesome. I think we're. I think.
What, that will fail?
No, I think it'd be. Well, I think we could all celebrate together in the top 5. What do you reckon? That'd be great. Maybe Joe, you join us.
Yeah, I want to make a suggestion to you about this self-publishing thing, which is maybe do the self-publishing angle like The Martian. When The Martian was published, I wouldn't say publish in chunks. I'd say publish the whole book. But when you publish it to Kindle, you could say this is version 1.0 and get feedback and respond aggressively to feedback. And then maybe in 2 years, there's a hardcover with the bestseller experiments novel plastered right on the front,
I love it.
And well, wouldn't it be kind of interesting too if there was a class of the bestseller experiment where you wound up with 3 or 4 bestsellers, and it was all writers who said, I listened to the bestseller experiment, I got something out of it, it led to this book. And then you guys it would almost be like, C.S. Lewis and J.R. Tolkien having the Inklings, where you would have this little community of people who had all bonded and did their best work because they were paying attention to the podcast.
That is awesome.
That would be amazing. That would be the dream.
Wouldn't that be cool?
That'd be fantastic.
Yeah, that'd be fantastic.
Brilliant stuff. Oh, wonderful. Well, it's been an absolutely amazing pleasure having you on the show, Joe. It's enlightening, and I've got pages of notes here. I don't even know where to.
Oh.
I think we have to go back to the drawing board with our kitchen scene, though, Mark, at the beginning of the book. And
it's okay to put it in the kitchen as long as something really uncomfortable is happening in the kitchen while they talk.
Brilliant. And tell us, Joe, what are you currently working? Give us a kind of a taster, if you can, as to what your next few months looks like.
At the moment, I've got 3 novellas complete for Strange Weather, but the book will be 4 novellas. The 4th is called Rain, which exists in first draft in a notebook, but I'm typing it up into second draft, and as I go, I add material and cut material out and change material and revise as I go. So you get a complete from scratch rewrite by the time it's typed into the computer. I'm hoping I've got that about 25% typed up, and I'm hoping to get the other 75% finished by the end of the month or, the first week or 2 of February. Then the next book will be complete, but because it is this weird Frankenstein project with 4 novellas, one of the novellas is very finished. One of the novellas is sort of finished, and the other 2 are still fairly rough. So there's the next 3 months is going to be a lot of revision. My comic book is being developed for TV. And so, thanks. Locke Key we actually had a pass. We almost made it on TV back in 2011. It didn't quite work out, but we're getting another pass at it. So I wrote the pilot script of that, and everyone seems to like it. So we're trying to make that happen. And I'm sure I'll be working on that quite a bit over the next 3 months too.
Incredible journey. Wowzers. And if people want to find out about you, Joe, online, where are the best places to get you?
I used to say Twitter about that, but I think I've never experienced writer's block until just in the last couple months, and it's very narrow. It's just Twitter writer's block. I just don't seem to have anything left to tweet. Probably the best place to find out about me is if you go to joehillfiction.com and then scroll down, you can sign up for my newsletter. And I send a newsletter out every month with weird stuff in it and news about what's happening. That's probably the best way to stay in touch.
Perfect stuff. Brilliant. Well, listen, thanks again, Joe, so much for your time today. We really appreciate this incredible threesome that we just had. I'll remember it for the rest of my life, honestly.
Oh, yeah, it was terrific. Apologies if I blabbed on too much. I had a great time.
There is no such thing. It was absolutely brilliant.
Gold.
Absolutely brilliant.
Gold.
And Joe, we're just going to throw out there as well. As someone who's been there and done it and been a bestseller, we're wondering if you had 10 minutes spare to cut apart our top level synopsis before we get deep into it. Would you be up for doing that?
Yeah, absolutely. Is this going to go on the podcast?
There's a good one.
Are you guys keeping how much have you talked about your synopsis and your story? And
Very little.
Your material.
Very
Yeah.
little.
So is this going on the podcast?
Yeah. Well, we could do that. That could be quite interesting, Mark, because we'll be a bit.
You have the nerve.
Yeah, we could go a bit deeper, and if it's closer to the date, for sure, I think we should do it.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah.
Brilliant stuff.
Wow, what if I hate it?
Well, exactly. Then we might have time to do something about it. That's awesome stuff.
Okay.
Brilliant.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, go for it.
Thank you so much, Joe, and all the best with all your incredible projects that are coming up. And thank you again so much for your time.
Okay. Take care, guys.
Take care.
Thank you.
And please subscribe, rate, and review us on iTunes, please. These all count. And if you want to get in touch online, we're on Twitter at bestsellerxp, Facebook Bestseller Experiment, Pinterest, and Instagram at bestsellerxp. And go to the website, bestsellerexperiment.com. You can drop us a line there as well. And you can follow us on Twitter too. I'm at Mark Say, and my learned colleague here is at 4000 Saturdays.
Excellent. And I actually just want to throw in there as well, something that happened this week with Scrivener, which was really interesting. So Mark and I were working on Scrivener together, and we're using Dropbox as this common place to keep our novel. And what's amazing about that is what I've discovered is, no matter where you are in the world, whether you're out and about and you get a minute to write, you can access your book. And I started editing something I was waiting for 10 minutes whilst my littlest was finishing off his footy practice. And what was really interesting about Dropbox is you also are getting that cloud backup. So I don't know how many stories I've heard, Mark. I don't know about you, but I've heard so many stories of people who have had that massive hard disk wipeout and actually lost 50,000 word novels. Has it ever happened to you? Have you ever lost anything?
Not to me. I always back up. And one little thing I do before I was using Scrivener and Dropbox is I used to just, at the end of every day, email myself a file. So it was always there in the sent file.
So something worth thinking about if you're using Scrivener, if you're connecting it to, say, a Dropbox or a Google Drive, something in the cloud, then you're going to just remove that potential heartache, because, there are people out there who have spent, I can't even imagine how many hundreds, thousands of hours writing. And I really appreciate about Scrivener. It's a great little thing. Now, there is obviously a chance you can get conflicts if you're working with two people. But the great thing about Scrivener is it actually tells you if there's a conflict. It creates a little file with the conflict in it, and you can just weave it back in. So the guys it has saved our bacon
this week, didn't it?
Thank you to the Scrivener team for creating that one particular feature that has been absolutely brilliant. So if you haven't tried Scrivener, pop over to literatureandlatte.com and give it a go.
And also, if like us, you were running just to keep up with Joe just now, because there was so much in that I found amazing. I'm going to be transcribing that. I'm going to be putting it in our free ebook, The Writer's Vault of Gold, which is now a proper book in its own right now. It's available on EPUB and PDF. We've got advice from Joanne Harris, Joe Abercrombie, Michael Connolly, Brian Cranston, Sarah Pinborough, and now the mighty Joe Hill as well. And it really is genuinely a vault of gold now. It's just fantastic. So look out for that. Come to the website, click on where it says free ebook, and you'll sign up to the mailing list. You'll get it on return.
Absolutely. And check out our competitions. As we said earlier, there might be some incredible stuff going up in the next few weeks. And don't forget to pop over to joehillfiction.com to check out Joe's work as well. What an inspiration. What an amazing guy. So much fun. I could have spoken to him for hours. Yeah, brilliant stuff. So thank you everyone for joining us this week on this incredible roller coaster ride that is the Bestseller Experiment. We appreciate your tweets. We appreciate your Facebook comments. We appreciate the emails through the website. We read every single one. So do get in contact. Tell us what you think of the show, how you're getting on with your book. And I think we'll just finish up, Mark, by saying it's a goodbye from Mark 1.
And it's a goodbye from Mark 2.
Goodbye.
Goodbye. To read Back to Reality, the best-selling novel of the Bestseller Experiment by the two Marks, go to bestsellerexperiment.com/Back to Reality.
And subscribe to this podcast to get loads of extra bonuses. Go to bestsellerexperiment.com/subscribe.